Hi, I'm Laith, and this is my grandmother. I will be interviewing her about how the government in Palestine and Israel has changed over time. So the first question we will be asking is who ruled over Palestine and the surrounding area at first? مين حكم على فلسطين والمنطقة حواليها أول شيء؟
من أولها؟ أول شيء كانوا العثمانيين اللي هم الأتراك، ثاني شيء انهزم الأتراك أجت بريطانيا وفرنسا.
So what he's saying is at first, the Ottoman Turks ruled over. After World War I, they ended up losing power to the British and the French, who then divided the land amongst themselves. They divided it so that Britain ended up getting Palestine, Jordan, and the surrounding area. My next question will be, how did the Israeli government arise from the British government? كيف الإسرائيليين أنشأوا بعد البريطانيين؟ شو صار؟
بعد 48 أجت الجيوش البريطانيين وطردت الفلسطينيين كلهم طلعوا، يشي على سوريا ويشي على لبنان ويشي على الأردن، لأنه انكسروا بعدها بريطانيا أخذتهم ما كانش معهم سلاح من برا، يعني ممنوع يشيلوا سلاح وطلعوا من البلاد سرقوا كله طلعوه.
So what she's saying is that the British had been preparing the Jews who had no homeland to take over the Palestinian land and establish Israel 30 years in advance to the Six-Day War, which happened in 1948 after World War II. So they ended up coming in, and the Palestinians were not allowed to use weapons. So the British government didn't allow them to use weapons. So when they came in, it wasn't really a war. That's why it was only 6 days. The Israelis just established a lot of the Palestinians just left, and the Israelis established the government. Some of them went to Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. Some of them stayed in Palestine and places such as the West Bank and Gaza. But the Israelis took power, and the British handed over power to the Israelis. Now I'm going to ask her about who ruled Israel and Palestine, and how were the governments of each one. كيف كانت إسرائيل حكومتها وفلسطين حكومتها بعد
9/11؟ إسرائيل استنت كل الفلسطينيين. الملك عبد الله كان مسؤول عن الأردن وعن عن الفلسطينيين، وكان مسؤول. قصدي كان مسؤول عنها وسط.
So what she's saying is that after the war of 1948, the Israelis established a democracy, and the Jordan annexed West Bank and East Jerusalem, and Jordan had a monarchy at that time, so there was a prince and a king, and they ruled over that. Gaza, however, in the southern area, was ruled by Egypt, and Egypt had a presidency. So now I'm going to ask her about how the government changed over time, and how the government is today of each territory, Israel and Palestine. كيف الحكومة تغيرت وصارت إسرائيل وفلسطين؟ شو صار؟
بعد ولاية الملك عبد الله استلمها الملك حسين، وكان الملك حسين مسؤول عن الضفة الغربية والأردن، مسؤول عنهم كلهم. وإسرائيل كان مسؤول عنهم رئيسي. وبعد 97 بعد 67 كان مسؤول أبو عمار، هذا شيخ ياسر عرفات، وعن غزة إسماعيل هنية، والملك الثاني كان مسؤول عنهم كلهم محمود عباس. هذا أبو عمار كان في تونس، أجا سنة 65 أجا ياسر عرفات وراح على فلسطين.
So what she's saying is that over time the Israeli government really didn't change much. They had a prime minister, they had a democracy. It was pretty much the same. But when we get into Palestine, the Jordanians ended up giving up the Palestinian territory, and they just kept in their monarchy in their own lands. And Egypt also gave up Gaza, and they just had their presidency in their own lands. But around 1965, the Palestinians started deciding that they need their own government for themselves. So they had these groups that fought for power, and Fatah, one of the groups, you may have heard of them before, ended up rising to power with Yasser Arafat as its leader, and he started leading in 1970. Over time, he ended up, when he died, they ended up choosing another president or another ruler from the same group, also from Fatah. But they also decided to make a new group, Hamas, who ruled over Gaza, in the Gaza Strip. And their ruler is Ismail Haniyeh. And then in the West Bank, after Arafat had passed away, they had Mahmoud Abbas as their president. So they ended up having these groups run them, but however, they weren't very powerful, and the Israelis still had a lot of control over the lands. So now I'm going to talk about the condition now. How is the Israeli and Palestinian conflict going on today? Are there any major changes or anything, or are they still fighting? كيف اليهود كيف حال الفلسطينيين والإسرائيليين كيف
خلينا حروب بين بعضهم أكثر شيء بين حماس وإسرائيل. فتح ما بتحارب الحين لأنه أمريكا بتدعم الإسرائيليين. فتح وحماس يعني مش كويسين في بعضهم، منشقين عن بعضهم. فتح لحاله وحماس لحاله. حماس اللي بتتكافل هي فلسطين اللي بتتكافل هي اليهود. فتح ما بتكافلش فيه اليهود. مش حرب بين بعضهم.
So what she's saying is that Fatah and Hamas have sort of split, and Fatah doesn't really fight the Israelis. Hamas is more fighting the Israelis, and there's still a huge conflict today. You may have seen on the news attacks on Gaza that Hamas fights the Israelis and Israelis fight Hamas, and conflict between them. There's many attempts for peace talks from the UN and from the US, and the US supports the Israelis and gives them money for weapons and helps them run their government and their army. And the Palestinians are like on their own, but there have been many attempts for peace talks to stop the fighting. However, sadly they have not worked because it's really hard to come to a concord on this conflict from the many years of fighting and the many sour years of conflict between them. So now we're going to ask about how, overall, in her opinion, how has Israel and Palestine, the conflict, how has it changed over time? The government, has it improved at all? Has it worsened? كيف تحسنت الحكومة ولا سيئة ولا صارت أسوأ وشو صار؟ حكومة إسرائيل الفلسطين بس يدخلوا مع بعض.
كافة شغال بين بعضهم بين حماس وبين إسرائيل. وفتح بتحاول إنها تهدي حماس مش راضية عليه بالمرة. يعني صار كافي. يعني حالة الفلسطينيين هالحين اللي في الضفة يرسلها هالسفر. أما حماس بتكافي بينهم تقاوم فيهم هم تقاوم فيهم إسرائيل وحماس.
So what she's saying is that Palestine and Israel, they really haven't got much better in condition. They're still fighting. They're still in bad condition. It's not good for anybody. Over time, it's just gotten worse, she says. It used to be not as harsh, where the Palestinians and Israelis intermingled, and the Palestinians could go work in Israel. But as the conflict got worse and worse, and Hamas started fighting Israel more, it went downhill from there. That now the Israelis and Palestinians have very sour feelings against each other, and it's not good for anybody to be fighting like this. She hopes peace talks can be made, but it's hard to see peace made in the near future.